Welcome to Married to History, where we try to be informative, entertaining, and family friendly.
Aloha, I'm Christopher. I have a fancy piece of paper on my wall that says that I know more about history than most people do.
I'm Shirley. I'm a homeschool mom that relies on good curriculum, Christopher, and Hairspray the Musical to teach our kids history.
Before we get into our episode, let's take a minute to talk about something from a past episode. It's important to keep in mind that Shirley doesn't warn me about our topic beforehand, and sometimes that means that I embarrass myself with all the things that I will say, and that one terribly important thing that I just could not remember for the life of me.
Yep, it's fun for me to see what he knows
But
right
I'm
off
not
the top
bitter.
of his head. You're not bitter or horribly ashamed.
No, there is no shame. I'm a father of 4. I have no shame.
So, honey, what have we learned since last time?
All right, you gave me a checklist on these things. All right, so first off, I recall that I think I said Hadrian's Wall might have been only like 10, 15 miles long. I couldn't remember how far it is across from one side of Britain to the other. So, no, I was way off. It's much closer to 60 or 70 miles.
That's the big difference.
Did you have the exact number?
I don't have it in front of
Okay,
me.
yeah, it was much closer to 60 or 70 miles. Let's see here.
Doomsday
What else
Book.
was there? Oh, yes, the Doomsday Book. So I mentioned over and over again how it was important because of the inventory. I asked you several questions. Why do you take inventory?
Yeah.
And yeah, this is the one that's really kicking me is that I never said, so he knew how much to tax people. So he knew how much taxes he could collect. Not just like
Yes.
resources he could take, of course, if ever there was war or anything, but yeah, how much to tax all the locals.
Yep.
I was there. Oh, yes, and then about Ivan the Terrible. So learned a couple of things about him that I don't recall hearing before.
Okay.
The one that I liked the most was that the moniker, the Terrible, was that he actually chose that himself. He was responsible
That's so
for that.
weird.
So yeah, you're inclined to say that it's weird, but when I found that out, when I
Yeah.
was listening to this historian, I don't remember what his field of expertise was, but he was talking about Ivan the Terrible, and he mentioned, and they had a couple of them actually all agreeing on this, that yeah, he chose this moniker, he chose to embrace this, he wanted to be terrible.
Yeah.
The first thought that I had, or okay, not the first thought, but one of the thoughts that I had was, that sounds an awful lot like Machiavelli. I'm
Yeah.
curious. So I looked it up, and yeah, Machiavelli wrote The Prince at a time where Ivan could have read that and gotten the idea of, I'm going to choose to be terrible. I'm going to embrace terrible.
So that was the branding he chose for himself.
Yeah. Because, okay, so for those who may not, what's the word I'm looking for, be
I don't know.
aware of Machiavelli's The Prince. Machiavelli wrote a book, and we call it The Prince. It was basically a bunch of essays, instructions, guidelines, I guess you could say, for specifically for the Prince of Italy that had hired him to do this, but it's applicable, or rather people have said that it's applicable to government in just about any form.
Yeah.
But among the pieces of advice that I remember when I read The Prince was in the argument of should your people love you, or should your people be terrified? Those weren't his exact words, but for the purpose
Scared
of
of
Ivan,
you.
we're going to go terrified of you. Machiavelli's conclusion was that it's okay to be both, but if you can't be both, it's better to be terrified than loved. And so that goes along with what Ivan chose, so I wouldn't be surprised. None of the historians that were in this documentary mentioned it, but that's one of those connections that
Yeah.
I would like to see a study on. Perhaps I'll do it myself one day
Perhaps you
to see if
should.
I can prove one way or the other that, yes, he did get that idea because he did read Machiavelli, or maybe he just came to the same conclusion that Machiavelli did on the matter. Either way, I thought that was a pretty cool thing about history.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are not familiar with The Prince, but you are familiar with The Office, that was the famous line where Michael Scott says, "I want people to be afraid of how much they love me." That was Michael's
Oh.
take.
Okay. I think
On the
I think you
concept.
told me that once upon a time.
Yes. All right, so we brought up Ivan the Terrible in episode 30
So
when we were
actually,
talking about villains.
One more thing on the matter. And also
Yes.
about The Prince. This is one of those books that I love so much, Shirley bought it for me twice.
I did. I forgot that you already had it. I might have bought it 3 times. I don't know.
In my quasi-younger days of history, I like to go around saying that Machiavelli was my political hero. To jest, I still kind of say that he's my political hero. I want to be clear. I said to jest. I still say that he's my political hero. I like the book, and he's not my political hero anymore. But I do like the book.
All right. Anyways, so I brought up Ivan the Terrible
I shouldn't
in
have
our...
admitted that on the air, because if anybody ever asked me, I'd still going to tell them Machiavelli's my political hero.
And now they'll know that it's only a joke.
Yeah, so you're going to have to cut that for me.
I sure will. So we
You're
brought
lying
up
to me
Ivan
right
the
now, aren't
Terrible.
you?
Yes.
You are a terrible woman.
Not
Sorry,
as terrible as Ivan.
I keep interrupting you.
Yes, you do. We brought him up because we were talking about historical villains. And he was on a list that I saw of like terrible people in history. So you need to tell me something good about him because that is what episode 30 was about.
All right, so it appeared from the little bits of the documentary that I was watching, it would appear that he was a good husband to his first wife. I think there were...
Did he have a harem?
When she died,
several?
no. Well,
okay.
When she died, that really hit him hard. That the historians in this particular documentary were saying that was the thing that made him like really embrace the no, I'm gonna be terrible thing, because he was, if not convinced, he at least suspected that she was poisoned, like his own mother had been poisoned.
Dang.
So that kind of turned him a little bit more towards the dark side, I guess you could say there. I don't remember thereafter how many other... I think he got married a number of times after that. I believe Elizabeth was one of the women that he tried to date.
Wait, Elizabeth the First?
Yes, it was one of the women that he tried to date or marry.
Oh, I didn't know they were contemporary. Okay.
And I think more likely he was actually pursuing a relationship with one of her handmaids.
Yeah.
That was also a relative of hers. I don't remember the name off the top of my head.
Okay.
But those were just two of the ones that I remember sticking out. They said that though he had lots of wives, or at least lots of attempts at wives after that. It seemed to me from what they were saying that in every way, shape, and form, he loved his first wife. Loved her. And they had a little girl, and I don't remember what happened to her, so I can't say what he did about his kids. Another good thing I guess you could say about him was that, okay, he unified his kingdom, but you said that unifying the kingdom doesn't count as that sort of thing. And yeah, it's not the way in which he ended up unifying his kingdom didn't seem so noble.
It usually isn't.
Quasi terrible.
It usually is.
But this is a funny story though. So about 30 years into his reign, he quits. He abdicates, leaves Moscow, packs up his bags, takes off.
Why?
Because there was a lot of trouble with the nobles, the noble families. One particular family, I don't remember their name, had like a lot more, or at least in his mind, they had a lot more sway. They were getting in his way, stopping him from doing things that he wanted to do. So he basically just said to the people of Moscow, I'm not allowed to rule the way I want to, so I quit. Bye, peace out.
Wait, so he threw a temper tantrum. He grabbed his ball and said, I'm going home.
Basically, but he was not throwing a temper tantrum. He did it on purpose.
Okay.
So he had no heir at that point, so there was no one to take over the throne.
Yeah.
So he left Moscow in a state of anarchy, and he knew...
They would ask for him back.
He knew the people were going to ask for him back, and they would give him a free hand if he agreed to come back. And sure enough, that was basically his condition, was that I want to be able to do whatever I want. And he came back.
That was quite a risk. Because someone else could have stepped up to fill that void, and he might not have been asked back.
That is certainly a possibility. In his case, it worked out.
Wow.
He was banking that exactly what you said was not going to happen, because it's a fair assessment, I would say. The local families that would have been trying to garner power while he was gone would have all been fighting with each other.
Right.
And we've seen plenty of times throughout history when disparate factions in the same small area will destroy one another before they actually bring unity to their place. So see, unity, even if done in a bad way, can be a good thing in that it tends to bring about peace, or at least a greater majority of peace and stability than exists in a not unified people.
Yeah, I know. In the long run, it's better. Still a cop-out.
Well, once upon a time, the United States were not so united, and 600,000 people died. I think that bringing unity was a good thing.
Are you talking about Civil War here?
Oh, I don't know, were we?
Oh, well, I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes. I think we can all agree that unity... Well, okay, I can't say that because I know there are plenty of people that are sad that the South lost.
Yeah.
But I think that most of us can agree that unity was a good thing.
Yeah, that's safe to say. All right, I had a couple corrections. Or not corrections, but new info.
You dare to correct me? Okay.
No. We weren't sure why it was called the Doomsday Book.
Okay.
This book that William the
I just
Conqueror
remember
commissioned.
that's not what it was called at the time.
Right. So I did look it up. The spelling that I've seen most common is Domesday. Apparently that is just a Middle English spelling of Doomsday.
Okay.
So it is the Doomsday Book. It can just be spelled Domesday. And that it wasn't given that name at first. That was centuries later that they started calling it the Doomsday Book. And it wasn't because like end of the world. It was like the final judgment at Doomsday is final. It can't be argued with. Just like the declarations in this book are final. They can't be argued with.
Okay.
So if I understood correctly, that's why it was called the Doomsday Book ultimately. And actually there were two. There was the Great Doomsday Book and the Little Doomsday Book. And they covered different parts of the country. So that was interesting. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard that.
Yeah, that was pretty neat. And then one other thing about Doomsday Book. I've heard it called the 1066 Doomsday Book. That's not right. 1066 is when the Normans conquered. But the Doomsday Book was written between 1085 and it was finished in 86.
Okay.
So it was like 20 years later. But that doesn't really matter, right?
Wouldn't be the first time. Well, think about it like this. So, when is the United States' birthday?
July 4th, 1776.
Very good. July 4th, 1776.
Mm-hmm.
But when was the Constitution?
Much later.
Much later.
Yeah.
But I think in the average minds of people, I think they just think that on July 4th, 1776, everything that we know about U.S. government, well, happened there. Good.
Yeah. And even then, wasn't it July 2nd? Really? Not the 4th?
July 2nd is when they rent it. July 4th was when they ratified it.
Okay.
Sorry, July 2nd was when they signed it. July 4th was when they ratified it.
I don't know.
I think.
I don't know. Either way, it's like, where do you start counting from?
Yeah, so it's entirely possible that somebody, some point in time, dated it, or just to help us recognize that it was in connection with the Normans, slap the 1066 label on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So an example here: some people are arguing that the 1619 Project is the proper, the accurate telling of America's story.
Okay.
So they're trying to slap a different year label on America's birthday,
just from a different perspective. Yeah. Okay. One final thing. Primus, it was very important to her that this be said. She is taking government for summer school, and she learned that vice president, so like when Nixon appointed Ford as his vice president, that vice president seat had to be confirmed by a majority of Congress.
By Congress, so not the Senate, but Congress?
She told me Congress.
Okay.
So I'm trusting her. I don't know if her book specified Senate versus House of Representatives. She just told me Congress.
Okay.
I don't know. But she was very excited to see that, and she was like, Mom, I found out.
So happy to hear that she's learning her government.
Yes,
it's very important. Not too many people understand the ins and outs, even the basic ins and outs of the government.
Yeah. So they're both girls are enjoying their summer school. I'm not sure enjoying is the right word.
I hope it's enjoying, because it's cool stuff.
What they're enjoying is that since they're doing it during summer school, there's a lot of essays and projects in the textbook that they're allowed to skip because it's a consolidated course. They're very happy about that, but they are learning as well.
I would hope that our listeners would agree with me that learning about the government is a cool thing, because as you learn more about the government, and then you can truly or better understand how big of fools some people that are in government are, big of fools some people and the candidates they support or the policies they support are fools. Well, I'm talking about voters here now. You can't say that all voters are fools.
Okay. I'm talking politicians.
Then I think that makes it cool, or that's one of the things that helps it to be all the more cool.
Yeah. It's certainly important.
It's like I enjoy being able to laugh whenever people say that, oh, I'm going to vote for such and such a president because they're going to do this, and being able to know that that's not the president's power. If he tries that, he'll be the exact kind of president that you say you don't want to have. Right. A tyrant who tries to do whatever he wants.
Yeah, that certainly happens a lot. All right, well, that is a perfect segue to our question today. We're going to do a little shorter one because our corrections took up a lot of time.
That is a good chunk of time, isn't it?
Yes, but I do have a history question for you.
I love history questions.
And this one comes from Quartus, our youngest. He says, is hanging Chad the famous hanging of a guy named Chad? Now, of course, we mentioned this in our Doomsday episode.
I'm sure if the guy who created it was named Chad, I'm sure plenty of people tried to hang him after this.
So just for context, this came up because in our Doomsday episode, we were talking about vice presidents again. I think we've mentioned vice presidents like the last 4 episodes.
I dare say we have mentioned vice presidents more in these last 4 episodes than Americans throughout history have acknowledged the existence of vice presidents.
Yes. So in that episode, I mentioned that Gore was being a crybaby because he.
You like calling people crybabies,
Yes.
don't you?
So, is Hanging Chad the famous hanging of a guy named Chad?
I'd love to be able to answer his question, but unfortunately that happened in the 2000s, so around the end of the 90s, early 2000s, I guess you could say. And I don't pay that much attention to anything that happened after the 50s. So
that's why this
I
is a
can't
shorter
possibly
episode.
Answer that question. Except if I were to guess.
Oh, sure, guess.
And I'll have to admit, I have to guess because while I'm pretty sure the knowledge I have is right, I never read or looked at anything official to find out if I was right or not.
You don't remember following it when it happened?
No, because I didn't really care enough when it happened. I was happy enough with or I shouldn't say happy enough. I was content with the results of the election.
Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, Hanging Chad refers to in Florida's ballots. They, rather than like filling in a bubble or marking an X or a check mark or anything to that nature, they had to hole punch the candidate that they wanted to vote for. And anybody who has ever used a hole puncher will know that it doesn't always make the part that you punched go away. Sometimes a little chad, shall we call it, hangs on to that piece of paper. And some way, somehow, those chads, as the ballots are being fed into the machine, supposedly led to miscounts or errors.
Okay, so I can give more details on this then.
Enlighten me, please.
Yes, I'm so excited too. So my first election that I was ever able to vote in, just turned 18, was also the first election that I helped my mom at a polling place. So my mom volunteered at every time we had an election, and the people that she worked with needed one more person. Perfect. Worked there all day. And that was the last election, as far as I remember. I could be wrong, but I think that was the last election where we had the hole punching cards. And so we had this machine that you would put your ballot into, and so all the holes would line up. It was just to help get everything lined up correctly, so then you knew where to punch. And yeah, the machine had this like stylus connected to a chain, and you would punch the paper. You would push down on the paper right next to the person's name, and it would punch a hole, and you'd have a little piece of paper hanging out the back. Okay, so my job was to teach people how to use that machine, and it was so fun, and it was easy, and we would give the little kids that came by like a little sample ballot, and they loved punching the holes. Like, it was not a big deal. Okay, it was like not the most complicated machinery in the world. My mom's job was to stand at the ballot box, and as people brought their ballots, she would, give them their I voted sticker, and she would have them hold the ballot and brush their hand on both sides of the paper to make sure every chad was off.
Okay.
And then they put in the ballot box. No problem. And then we find out that Florida is losing its brains over people not punching things correctly. And it wasn't just that the chads were still hanging on by like the tiniest little thread, but it was like if you didn't push the stylus far enough, it might bubble at the paper instead of punching the paper and like pushing the little scrap of paper out. So there was a lot of that. The question in this Florida election, which you can get into more, is can we actually say with certainty the people were voting for Gore or Bush? Because there was too much dispute over, was this a vote or was this a mistake? Because the chads weren't all the way through.
Okay. Well, in my limited knowledge of this particular scenario, as I recall, Gore exhausted all of the legal challenges he was allowed to make on the matter, and the Congress, much like the recent election, Congress certified the election, so it doesn't matter at this point. maybe at some point in the future, some new research, some new evidence, some new investigation will demonstrate that, okay, no, Gore actually won in Florida, or maybe that Bush won by a wider majority or shorter majority than we presume that he did.
Right.
But that's one of those things where it's over now. So, like so many other things, what if the Confederacy had won? What if the American Revolution had failed? What if Elizabeth had gotten married? Oh, we could speculate all
so
we
fun
want
to speculate.
and it's fun. And I've read quite a few pieces of historical fiction that had some hilarious takes on some of these things, or some great takes on some of these things. But we're never gonna know, and anything that we might say to, oh, this is going to be the type of event that's going to prompt us to make a change so that this process can be smoother next time. Well, as we've already noticed from our many years afterwards, the process has been simplified, smoothed out.
Yeah.
They don't have that problem anymore.
Yeah. Which I wonder if they have other problems. Now, of course, every
often
election...
enough when there is one problem.
Yeah.
Often enough when you do fix one problem, you trade it off for another problem.
Right. And so for maybe our kids are going to listen to this 10 years in the future and they're going to have no idea what we're talking about because elections are going to be completely different. But so at the moment, like where we live, it's a bubble. It's like a Scantron or a bubble test. You have to color in the bubble with an ink pen all the way to vote. And some states have done the voting machines where you push it on the screen, a little button. And those have had a lot of problems.
Yeah, well, so I know we've encountered, I think everybody under the sun is at least suspicious of the problem of, oh, maybe I didn't bubble in all the way, or the machine for some reason didn't read my bubbling, even though I thought I bubbled in all the way. And then, yes, with the voting machines, there's always the concern of either hacking or misprogramming in the machine itself. What was that movie that Robin Williams did?
He's done a lot.
Man of the Year.
I don't think I saw that one.
I think it was called Man of the Year. He played, for lack of a better term, I think he played basically like the late night comedian of a fictional character of the time who, as a joke, decided to run for president.
Yeah.
And in the movie, he wins. It's revealed because there was a problem in the software of the voting machines.
Right.
And it made him win merely because his initials were repeated. Something about his initials being repeated. I think that was the reason.
Okay.
Something
Just
about
like
his
a
initials
glitch.
being repeated caused a glitch in the system that gave him more votes than he actually received.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, there's always going to be the case of people are going to want to know, how do we know it's a safe, fair, accurate election? Well, we have some sort of watchdog agency, some body that's designed to make sure the election was fair. Well, who watches the watchers?
Yeah.
Or that question is always going to be there.
Now, so to bring it back to something farther in the past, something that you are more familiar with, how did we see this kind of problem play out? Let's say Jim Crow era, when black men and women were supposed to be able to give them the right to vote, and they were prevented from doing so. Mm-hmm. How did it look back then?
What do you mean, how did it look back then?
You're talking about like the watchdogs, like making sure things are done correctly, and who watches the watchdogs.
Okay, so that would be an example of nobody in the federal. So who gets to vote is determined by the states, so long as the states' rules don't violate federal rules on the matter. So once upon a time, the South could have said that no, black men can't vote because as states that's our right. But then you get the 15th Amendment. It says that okay, you can't use race as a reason to not allow people to vote.
Okay.
So they come up with other reasons, I'm using quotes when I say other reasons, for why these men and women aren't able to vote. And it's not because of the color of their skin. It's a case of the federal government. All right, so I can't honestly say to this because I don't remember doing any heavy research on the matter, but I would be inclined to say that, all right, so a lot of black men and women try to go to vote. Sometimes they get help from black men and women who know the laws, or even white men or whatever, men and women who knew the laws and were trying to sincerely help them to get to vote.
Okay.
Often enough, what would happen is that the prospective voters, they would be lied to. They'd be told, oh, you got to do this, that, or the other thing, some chore, something ever so shy of climbing the tallest mountain and slaying the mightiest dragon.
Yeah.
And that would be enough for some people, and so they'd say, oh, I can't do this thing, and they told me I can't vote, so I'm just going to go home and not vote.
Don't try.
The ones that would try to be a little bit braver and like force the issue, they would be physically intimidated by the either the Klan or some other group of people that were there pressuring them or threatening them, intimidating them not to do so. More than a couple of people were, if not actually lynched, at least threatened with lynching if they made a stink about the matter. But what you ultimately get is that either because not enough people were reporting it, or because they lacked the manpower, or arguably because they didn't care enough about it, the federal government, and even in some cases the state governments, weren't enforcing the rules on the book. So I know we've talked about this before. Oftentimes, when something bad happens, a lot of politicians are quick to say, oh, this bad thing happened, we need more laws. And often enough, no, it's actually just a case of we had the laws already, they just weren't being enforced.
Right. That sucks.
It does stink.
All right. Do you have anything else that we need to know about elections or voting, or how Gore is a crybaby, or how Florida is a armpit?
Florida is an armpit?
I'm not allowed to swear. They're the armpit of America. I don't know.
Is that because they're shaped like an armpit? I just don't get the reference.
Well, I've heard this other places referred to like the armpit of, you know, whatever state. And it's like, it's like a hot, humid, awful place. So it's an armpit.
All right. Yes, I can't, I'm not trying to mock or be mean to the good people of Florida, but the one time that I was in your state, the weather, I did not appreciate it. I did not enjoy as you must surely do. So yes, when I say I don't like Florida, I don't like the weather. I'm not saying that you Floridians are bad people.
I am going to continue to tease them to my dying day about that entire debacle, though. The whole thing that brought us here to the hanging chads.
All right.
Why? Why is that such a problem?
So I'm not saying that
count the votes and be done with it.
I'm not saying that you don't have the right to tease them about that. But surely you recognize that Florida has more than a fair number of reasons to tease us Californians.
Never.
Not necessarily about a voting condition 20 years ago.
I was teaching 3-year-olds how to use the stylus to punch their vote through. It's easy.
All right, so it would seem I'm not going to get anywhere in this conversation. So
I'll listen.
So
Go ahead.
My wife hates Florida. I hold nothing against Florida. You can't control your own weather.
I don't hate Florida. I'm
sure
just
sounded like you were saying that you hate Florida.
Just like to tease stupid people.
All right, you like to tease stupid people. So you should really not be angry when people tease you anymore.
How dare you!
Just pointed out. Didn't you yourself say everybody was stupid? I mean, I was talking about voters. You're a voter, and you said
no, I didn't mean that. I just wasn't listening to what you were actually saying.
Yes. You know who else doesn't mean what they say and doesn't listen to what other people say? Stupid people.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not polite. Foolish people.
Yes.
Well, okay, there's more that. Okay, you keep doing this to me. Any more that we should say or do? It's like there's lots more that can be said.
Are you inspired to say something you think is really important?
I think it is important that people vote. I get that you might not always like the candidates that are available to you. I get that you might not always like the bills or the propositions or whatever that are available to you. I get that you might think that your city, state, country, whatever is a bad cesspool and you don't care about it anymore. But you really should vote. Our process depends on people voting. Our process depends on educated people voting.
So if you're stupid, stay home. That's what he's saying. That
is not what I said. Democracy or representative government in any of its forms requires a well-educated voting base. A not well-educated, a foolish voting base will vote for foolish things.
Right.
So it is important to be in school to educate yourself, whether that be going to school, going to college, going to a trade school, reading books on your own, whatever the case is. And yes, you should vote because these things do matter. For every person that doesn't vote, or I can't say for every individual person that does. Oh, actually, no, I will do that. On the idea of, okay, your one vote won't count, why bother? I do not recall the chain of events accurately off the top of my head, but through a series of 3 one-vote issues, if I'm remembering correctly, there's a congressman who gets put into, or so that, I want to say he was from Illinois. I might be getting the state wrong. Who gets elected to Congress by one vote. Makes it into Congress.
Wow.
When he's in Congress, by his one vote,
Yeah.
Texas is admitted into the Union as a state. So
What?
by a chain of, if I'm remembering that correctly, by
Oh,
a
it sounds
chain-
really cool. We'll go with it.
by a chain of these one vote actions,
Yeah.
a whole state gets
Yeah.
to join the country.
Yeah.
So never assume your one vote doesn't count, because your
Mm-hmm.
one vote is one of many that contributes to a process and
Yeah.
might be the key one necessary
Yeah.
to sway things one side or another. Not to mention that for all you people who may think that your city, your state, or your country, or whatever are terrible, awful cesspools, you really have no right to complain if you didn't vote. How's it
Yeah.
going to get any better if you're one of the people who wants it to be better, and instead of voting, you're sitting at home doing nothing?
It's
One
so
of-
much
oh,
easier to sit at home and complain, though.
Yes, I get that, but that's not responsible. So I'm reminded, when I might have talked about this lady before. I'm reminded of one of my earlier days in college. It was a government class. I don't remember how the subject came up, but I'm doing some group project with this one lady who seemed very nice. I mean, I believe I've been sitting next to her for the majority of the semester. I'm pretty sure I had several interesting conversations with her, but this
Yeah.
is the only one that I like really remember off the top of my head. At some point during our discussion, she told me that she doesn't vote.
Yeah.
And when I asked her why, she said, "Oh, I don't vote out of principle."
That makes no sense.
And I never got her to tell me what principle.
What principles?
Because it made no sense to me. I know that she complained about this, that, or the other thing
Yeah.
under the sun, and yeah, the whole time I'm thinking that you can't complain about these things if you're not voting off of principle.
How do you expect things to change?
She wants other people to make the changes for her.
But that's not
I
how
don't know.
the process works. You know what? We ran into people like that working at the polling places too, and maybe
You ran into people that don't want to vote at the polling
okay.
places?
So no, I'm remembering this specific man who he came in with his wife. She and they told us this. She was a recent immigrant she'd recently gotten her citizenship. And she was so excited to be able to vote. I don't remember what country she had come from, but she was so excited to vote as a new citizen.
That's cool.
And he was so proud of her. He was supportive and like helping her. You know, her English wasn't perfect. So he was making sure that she understood, you know, where we were asking her to sign and where she was supposed to go. And so after she was sent to the booth to go vote, he was just hanging around and we were talking to him and he said, you know, we're asking him, do you want to sign in so you can vote too? He's like, oh, no, I don't vote. But what? But you're so... I don't understand. And he was like, no, it's not worth it. Like, but you're so excited for your wife to do the process. But it made no sense. It made zero sense. Like, what are we doing here? So I'm glad that he didn't prevent her from voting because of his crazy ideas. But it was just so sad. It's like, you don't fully understand what's happening here, sir.
It's not so much a rare privilege anymore, but it is still rare in many parts of the world. Not every country allows its citizens to have a say in the matter,
Yeah.
or is bound by law to obey when their citizens do voice
Yeah.
their concerns on the matter. There are plenty of people around the world who would love to be able to have this opportunity to vote in their countries, in their government, same way, shape, or form. And yeah, we're really people who don't vote are not only being foolish, but you're being kind of a jerk when you don't participate like that.
Yeah. In their government class, in their reading today, Secundus was telling me that what was it? Voter turnout is about 60%. And I was like, there's no way that's true. And then she read it again. She said it said like, is rarely higher than 60%. I was like, yeah, it's most likely lower from my experience, what I remember.
And I remember they've been doing studies on this for a while. It turns out that it's the presidential elections get big turnouts.
Yeah.
Midterm elections, as they're so called,
Yeah.
which I think is ridiculous because 4 year or 2 years isn't the midpoint for every office and thing that's
but
out
we
there.
only care about presidential
But the president
terms.
is the one that gets all the attention. Yeah. So and midterm elections are notoriously not anywhere near the turnout.
Oh yeah, you remember you worked with me with the polling places sometimes too. Presidential election years, we were so slammed. We were on our feet all day processing voters. And midterms, dude, bring a book. There's nothing to do because no one is coming in, and it was sad.
Yep.
All right. Well, do you have anything else to say about voting or fair elections or hanging chads or Florida? Or Gore.
Only because you use the exact word fair elections. All right.
Uh-oh.
So I want to be clear on this. All right. There is a difference, I think, between fair elections and legal elections.
Okay, so without engaging in is the media unfair to the Republicans debate, aside from that, do you think that third-party candidates get a fair shake?
Oh, third-party candidates do not get a fair shake at all. Or in my opinion, they don't get a fair shake at all. So the elements that one would have for it being a fair argument is that, okay, well, they obviously don't have the majority of the support. There's not enough people that want to see them succeed in order for them to warrant larger audiences and whatnot.
Right.
But what I think is not fair about it is the idea of options. Think about it as in if let's say that you're going to go to a buffet. What makes for a better buffet? A buffet that gives you 2 options, or a buffet that gives you 3, 4, 5 more options?
Oh yeah.
I think that most of us would agree that no matter how good those 2 options are, even one more option would be nice.
Right.
At least once in a while. And third-party candidates do have measures of success here and there. There have been some that have made it to governor. There's some that have served in Congress. And the smaller levels we go, more and more third-party candidates have been successful. But there's a saying that I really, really don't like. I think it's... While there's an element of honesty into it, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing.
Oh, for sure.
The idea that, okay, the vote for a third-party candidate is wasted.
Yeah.
So we can look at the election of, was it 92? Not 92 as an example. Bill Clinton running against George Bush for re-election, and Ross Perot is running as well. Ross Perot is running as a third-party candidate. I want to say he was running as a reformist, or he might have been running as an independent. I don't remember for sure.
All I know is that he got a lot of airtime on SNL.
He got a lot of airtime on SNL, he did. And so people will argue that, okay, well, the reason Clinton won that election is because Perot took away too many votes from Bush, and Bush would have won had Perot not won.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair conclusion that, Bush probably would have won if Perot had run. We could go back farther. The most successful election, a third-party candidate, the largest time that a third-party candidate ever got was, I think, 23% of the vote.
Whoa.
And that was back in when Teddy Roosevelt and Taft and Wilson ran against each other in the 1912 election.
Okay, but those are all 3 big heavy hitters. Those are big names that people already knew.
No, they weren't at the time. So Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. He had had some political office before. I don't remember what, but he wasn't that big name. But he was the Democratic candidate.
Got it.
Taft was the incumbent president running for re-election. Yeah. And Roosevelt, yes, everybody knew him because he was running for re-election again. He was running for a 3rd term.
That's what's important. People are voting for him. They weren't voting for a third-party candidate. So they're voting for Roosevelt.
So that is a fair thing. But anyway, that is the most successful that a third-party candidate, whether they were running or not.
So you do have to be a huge name as a third party to get any airtime
in order to get this place. Yeah. So people will say that, yes, you shouldn't vote third party because that's just going to be a wasted vote. It prevents your vote from going to a better person than the person that might have actually won, for example. And it's a legit criticism. I cannot deny that. But I don't like it because it encourages that our choices are only ever going to be the Democrats and the Republicans. It discourages any of the other parties from being able to make headway.
Right.
So there might be a lot of people that are currently independents, or maybe even a lot of people who are Republicans or who are Democrats, who actually do more align with some of these other parties. But for the reasons I can't claim that I know what their reasons are, but they're not going to join those parties, or they're not going to support those party candidates because they say to themselves that, oh, they don't have a shot in winning. So it's literally the idea of you are embracing the idea of pick the lesser of two evils instead of pick the person you think is good for the job. Right. The argument of don't vote for third party because it's going to be a wasted vote is the argument of vote for the lesser of two evils instead of vote for the person that you want. Because, now, I want to be clear. Yeah. If you legitimately think that the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate is the best person for the job, vote for them. Absolutely. I'm not saying never vote for them. But if you think somebody else is the best candidate for the job, I think it behooves you to vote for that person, even if your vote will supposedly be wasted. The more people, even if it looks like it's a long shot right now, the more people that do have the courage to do that, to vote for those third-party candidates, well, then we have the option of those third-party candidates actually starting to garner more support to a point where maybe they will actually be able to be competitive.
But that's the long game, and it's really hard. It is the long game,
and I understand that nobody is a big fan of the long game. Nobody wants to play Monopoly for the duration. They want to...
Short-term victories, honey. Short-term.
Nobody wants to play Monopoly to the end. Nobody wants to play Risk to the end. Nobody wants to play Axis and Allies to the end.
No. What are some other long games? Those games are so long. All right. I said it was going to be a shorter episode, and it didn't end up being.
It's about an average episode.
Yeah, we'll see.
That's because you kept asking me, is there anything more you want to say? And then you gave me something to feed off.
That's true. I need to stop doing that.
You need to stop encouraging me.
That is true.
You need to be a good wife. Good wives don't encourage their husbands to do anything.
Sure. All right, thank you for listening.
I don't mean to offend any wives that are listening, or any husbands for that matter. Well, no, I don't care about them. I meant what I said about all husbands. What did I say about? Did I say anything about?
I don't even know.
I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Just edit all this part out. I'm embarrassing myself.
If you liked what you heard, then please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a 5-star review.
And vote.
There's no election coming up.
Coming up.
I mean, not like
year.
Imminently.
Next year is an election year.
Is it next year?
The primary campaigns are already starting.
Oh, shows what I know.
I love you.
Obviously, I don't follow. I'm one of those foolish voters who doesn't educate themselves enough about the people and the issues.
But you vote.
I vote, and I educate myself that last week.
Yes, you do actually educate yourself a little bit before you cast that vote. All right. If you'd like to hear a future episode with more information about today's topic, contact us on Gmail, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at Married to History Pod.
Also, please contact us if you have a silly question idea or if there's something from history that you would love to learn about.
Just be sure to specify in your message if it's silly or serious, because we don't want to treat a genuine quest for knowledge like a joke.
Talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. It ain't right and it ain't natural. What you were gone so long. Lover, I was lonesome, so I built a foundry. In the ground beneath your feet, here I fashion things of steel. Oil drums, automobiles, and I kept that furnace fed with the fossils of the dead. Lover, when you feel that fire, think of it as my desire. Think of it as my desire for you.
That was lovely. Thank you.
Don't you dare put that in the outfits.
I'm going to.
At least not the whole thing.